LaRouchePack.com, and I am very happy to have Harley back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Harley, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm doing great, and I just want to talk about the elephant in the room right now, and a lot of people are talking about this. The mainstream media is really not covering this. They're covering a lot of other things, saying it's not really a big deal, but Trump came out yesterday, and he released this statement that he's going to declassify everything, the text messages with Strzok and Page. He's going to be declassifying everything that went on with the FISA, with Carter Page. Where do you think this is all going to lead? I mean, is this a bombshell moment right now?
That's the word I was going to use. It is a bombshell because it hits the deep state right in the kisser. You know, their whole operation has been based on using the cover of classification to argue that you can't expose what we did because that would expose our deep plant agents possibly to being killed. Now, what are they really talking about? Who are their deep plant agents? You know, what Trump did with this declassification is rip the cover off a coup in progress. And the coup is being directed by a coordinated executive operation from the City of London, MI6, the highest levels of British intelligence, coordinating with the most corrupt networks of U.S. intelligence, the Obama intelligence community, the Brennans, the Clappers, the Comeys. Mueller is a part of this. And, you know, then you see the lower level operatives like Peter Strzok and McCabe and Bruce Orr, lower level in the sense that they weren't making policy, but they were carrying it out. They were loyal operators for a coup against the president that was a violation of our Constitution, a violation of many U.S. laws, a violation of the Code of Ethics for the FBI and the Justice Department. And we've seen bits and pieces of this with the Nunes Committee and other congressional committees. But now the whole ball of wax is going to be put into the open. And I can tell you that the FBI and the supporters of Comey and Mueller are not pleased at all by this. You can see Adam Schiff's eyes bugging out more than usual.
Do you think the mainstream media is going to cover any of this?
Well, I don't think they're going to cover the level of the freakout because they are trying to say that this is just Trump out to defend himself because he's in trouble now that Manafort pled guilty. You know, the narrative continues to be that sooner or later Mueller is going to find the Russian collusion and Trump is going to be finished. Now, in the meantime, they're doing everything they can to destroy the potential of the president to act. And the one thing I would say about what the media is not covering is some of the developments that Trump is either directly involved in coordinating or is at least a partner in carrying out, which are really a matter of life and death for the American people. The Korean, organization on the Korean Peninsula, for example. Today, President Moon of South Korea and Kim of North Korea met in a pretty much unprecedented historic meeting to map out the potential unification of these two countries on the basis of extended economic cooperation. You also had a very significant development today, a flanking action with President Putin of Russia and Erdogan of Turkey with their agreement to not launch an all-out assault into Idlib province, but to call the bluff of the West by essentially setting up a safe zone, trying to create a circumstance where civilians can leave if they want, or that the terrorists could leave if they want, to show that it's not the Syrians and the Russians that are at fault, but the West, including the British government, the French government, and this big mouth Nikki Haley and her buddy John Bolton, who are literally defending the al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria. So these are extraordinary developments that, along with Trump's declassification, should give a signal to those people who have been down in the dumps a little bit, thinking that all is lost. In fact, we're holding the upper hand on this. And if Trump keeps his nerve, and it looks like he will, and he keeps working behind the scenes with the handful of people who are supportive of him, and this includes people like Putin, Xi Jinping of China, With all the turmoil on the surface, underneath, there's a lot going on. And it's something that people just won't know because of the control of the media by this deep state apparatus.
Now, does this stop the Mueller investigation? Because if this is all declassified and the FISA application and everything that we're seeing here is released, and we find out that it was done under false pretenses, what happens to the Mueller investigation?
Well, I don't think Mueller's going to stop. I think he's committed to following this thing through to get a regime change in the United States. Part of the problem is that most of what we're going to find out from the declassified documents, we already know. We know that there was a network of people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the two FBI agents who were involved in the Hillary email investigation. They were involved in the early phase of the Russiagate. They were openly telling people, we're going to stop Trump. They were working with Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI. Comey. They were also, on some level, we're going to find out they were briefing Obama. This has already been out, that one of their text messages said, POTUS wants to know about this. But if it all comes out in one centralized dump, it does present the opportunity for people who have been defending the president to be much more direct and aggressive in that defense. Now, will that stop Mueller? No. Is that going to force the New York Times to start telling the truth or the CNN to start telling the truth? Of course not. They're on a course to destroy this presidency. And I want to make one point here that, again, this is something that very few Americans are familiar with. But there's a top official from the German Defense Ministry during the 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century named Willy Wimmer. He was a top ally of Kohl, Helmut Kohl, very significant figure going back to the Reagan years. And he made the statement the other day, and it shocked everyone in Europe. He said, Donald Trump is the only thing standing between a war between the United States and Russia. And if Russiagate is successful, he said there will probably be a war, even a nuclear war in 2019. That is, if Trump is removed. And almost at exactly the same time, Paul Craig Roberts, the former Treasury Department official under Reagan, made the same statement. So did those statements get out generally? Not really. But it's your job, it's my job to make sure that people know about these things. Now, just to go back to the Mueller question. Okay. I think that what we're going to see is the Democrats going on an even more frenzied drive to try and win the November 2018 midterm elections and create the circumstances where they'll control the committees, which means if Schiff is in charge of the committee instead of Nunes, they're going to try and put a clamp on it. That's why these midterms are so important. And that's why people who listen to the X-22 report need to make sure that not only do they vote, but they mobilize others. And it's a question of voting to back up the president against this coup. And if enough people do that, then even if the Democrats make some marginal gains, they're not going to be in a position to impeach the president. And it will stiffen the spine of some of these gutless Republicans who have been unwilling to step forward and really back up the president.
And you mentioned impeachment. I just want to go down this path for a sec. I mean, Maxine Waters is out there, and she's pushing impeachment like there's no tomorrow. I mean, she's screaming and yelling that we need to knock off the president. And then once he's gone, knock off the vice president. I mean, why are they pushing for impeachment so hard?
Well, they're hysterical. I mean, Maxine Waters' mouth runs before her brain starts working. There's another character, Al Green, who represents Houston, who said the other day, he doesn't care if there are no grounds for impeachment. The president must be impeached. So, I mean, how much more blatant can they be? But you have to look at the people above these loudmouths. Who's pulling the strings on this? The deep state, which is largely a conglomeration of consultants, bankers, insurance operations, cartel networks and the defense sector and the intelligence community, their whole view is that the Trump election destroyed the continuity that they expected with the Hillary victory. They thought the Bush-Obama policies would be continued with Hillary. And what Trump did is not just defeat Hillary. He made clear he was going to overturn the whole geopolitical domain, the trade agreements, the economic policies, the relations with Russia, the U.S. no longer supporting regime change wars, even the special relationship with Great Britain. He doesn't really care about that. He's concerned about what is needed for the American people. And this goes against the deep state. It goes against the post-Cold War agreement between Democrats and Republicans to have neoconservative strategic policies, namely war, and neoliberal economic policies, namely bailouts and free money for the wealthiest people to speculate while grinding down the population and destroying American manufacturing and productivity. So Trump threatens all of that. And that's why you see people squawking like Maxine Waters and Al Green and Adam Schiff, who in themselves, they're very minor figures. They don't represent much. And that's why it's so important that this narrative be shut down. And by declassifying these papers, including what was in the FISA warrant and then these other backdoor investigations being run by top people in the Justice Department, including Rosenstein. Rosenstein's fingerprints are all over this. So by doing this, Trump is putting in the hands of his allies the ammunition needed to destroy this operation. And it doesn't just mean an election victory or a few positions here or there. It means the agreements that have worked for the last 30 years to make a handful of people super wealthy and super powerful who can destroy nations by their policies, at the drop of a hat. They're about to lose everything. And that's why it's so important for people to realize that we're entering into a new strategic geometry, which, by the way, will include some very significant changes in finance and economics, including the move away from the funny money central banking policies towards something based on physical economy and possibly gold.
I'll get into that. We'll get into the economy in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you questions about Sessions. Since this will be the FISA will be declassified, and Sessions recused himself because of Russian collusion, and he wasn't going to be part of the case, and he handed it off to Rosenstein. Now that all of this is turning out to be fake, and once all this information comes out and we find out there was no Russian collusion, can he now unrecuse himself from this?
I think after the November midterm Sessions is gone. He has proven that he's not effective in doing his job. It's not a question of whether he's defending Trump or not. He's allowing corrupt, immoral elements in the Justice Department to break the law and to run a coup against an elected president, which is not just against the president, but against the American people that voted for him, that enabled him to win the presidency. So, I think that I'm not sure we'd want Sessions to unrecuse himself because I'm not sure he's a competent person. I think the president has to find someone who understands the situation and put someone like that in there who will fight for the Constitution and fight tooth and nail for it.
Okay. And how deep do you think this goes? I mean, you're talking about the surface layer and you're talking about, Adam Schiff. Will this lead all the way back to Obama or Clinton or any Loretta Lynch?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at Hillary Clinton. If you look at the FISA warrants, you look at the whole Russiagate story, the Russian meddling, Trump collusion, where did that come from? It was paid for by the Clinton campaign through a company, Fusion GPS, that hired the wife of the number 4 person in the Justice Department, Bruce Orr's wife, Nellie. This is a company that worked with a so-called former top official of British intelligence, Christopher Steele, who was backed by the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. So Hillary Clinton is in bed with the top networks and that's a disgusting thought, Hillary in bed with someone, but this is the reality of it, that this is why they're so frightened that this thing is going to come out. As for Obama, he's up to his neck in it. Why do you think Obama's out campaigning right now? Because if he's afraid that if there's not a blue wave, then he's going to be the next person called in. And, I'm not talking about hidden sealed indictments. I'm talking about the possibility in the open to show that these people are lawbreakers. They're serial lawbreakers, and they deserve their time in court and before grand juries and probably in prison. So that's what we're looking at here. And Obama's not safe. Hillary Clinton's not safe because they were all deeply involved in breaking the law to run a coup against the election.
Do you think if the Republicans win the election, the midterms in November, do you think, like Obama, he's out there campaigning, Joe Biden, the rest of them, John Kerry, who's visited Iran many, many times, even though he's not part of the government, he's a civilian now. Do you think they are going to be on the run because they know that it's game over?
I think they're already on the run. I think that's why Obama's on the campaign trail, and Hillary just wrote this completely insane editorial against Trump that I believe was in the Atlantic. They know what's at stake here. And, you look around the world, go outside of the United States for a moment. You look at the situation in Europe, where the European Union, as long as it continues to function as an arm of British banking, City of London banking, and Frankfurt being a part of that City of London, the German government's not going to survive. Macron in France, his popularity has fallen through the floor. You've got governments in Italy and in Austria that are moving to break with some of the European Union policies, including ending sanctions on Russia. So, there's a global insurgency that's taken on the network that gave us the Clintons, the Bushes, the Obamas, the Theresa Mays, the David Camerons, the Angela Merkels. This is a network which is on the run right now. And you would never know it from reading the media because, they tell you that these are the people making policy. But, Merkel's coalition is the SPD, the CDU, and the CSU. Those three parties are below 50% right now. The Tory party is in a state of collapse in the United Kingdom. So just as we see the Democratic and Republican parties are unpopular, what's popular? Well, Trump was popular because he wasn't controlled by either party.
If the deep state, the cabal, doesn't get their way and everything starts to fall apart, and it's already starting to fall apart around them, and they're talking about impeachment, which we just discussed, most likely they won't get impeachment. Do you think they will take this to the next level, and I'm talking about an assassination, to get him out of office, to make this all stop?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think they have several fallback options. One is we saw the game plan in the Woodward book and in the New York Times anonymous op-ed, basically saying that people are talking about Trump being crazy, Trump can't handle the job, the 25th Amendment. Those have been in the background all along. Assassination is a possibility, but there are two other possibilities. One is war. Why do you think the British keep bringing up the Skripal affair, to try and say the Russians are out to poison people? Why do they keep bringing out the White Helmets, this fraudulent gang that is conducting false flag chemical weapons stories to try and launch a strike in Syria that could very well hit Russia? So war is another one of their options. And when you have a loose cannon like the crazy Bibi Netanyahu and his gang of hardcore Zionist fanatics, that's another element that can be thrown into that. And then there's a third option, which is pulling the plug on the financial system. One of the things that President Trump has been campaigning on is the so-called recovery. Now, I think it's very weak. I don't think this is quite what it's made out to be. And I think Trump correctly identified a stock market appreciation during the Obama years as not a recovery. But he's setting himself up by not going with an infrastructure program, by not going with Glass-Steagall to take on the runaway banks. He's being set up for them to pull the plug on the stock market, and then the great Trump recovery becomes the great Trump collapse. Now, one thing I'll tell you, Dave, that is interesting on the financial side of things, Roger Stone reported the other day that in discussions with Larry Kudlow, he raised the question to Kudlow, why has Trump not done anything with Glass-Steagall? And Kudlow said, it's coming. So I think, again, in the background, there's a lot of discussion of things that you and I have talked about for years that are not yet in front of the public. But this is what scares the hell out of the deep state. Glass-Steagall would force the major investment banks in this country and the big commercial banks, the too big to fail banks, to eat their losses because they would no longer be backed up by the Federal Reserve or government money. And there goes their power. So that's what they're scared of.
Before, when Trump was a candidate, he said, the bubbles in the stock market, bubbles everywhere. We see it. This is, not a recovery. And when he became president, he saw that everything that he thought was right. And he used the same manipulation to make the economy look a lot better than it was, to try to stop the deep state and the establishment from saying, listen, he destroyed the economy. It's broken. And, they were going to blame it on him. By him switching the GDP calculations, by him continuing with the manipulation of unemployment, he made the economy look like it was a lot better. It's a lot better than it really is. I mean, just by tweaking some numbers. And this strategy might be to say, hey, look, I made the economy great. If this news comes out about the declassification and the market falls, it's because of that. If the Fed raises rates and the system starts to break down, I can blame the Fed. Maybe this is part of a plan where he's trying to stop those from blaming him for the economy failing.
Yeah, he's already laid the groundwork for that with a couple of his messages to the chairman of the Federal Reserve about the raising interest rates. He's also been talking to people about restoring manufacturing, and there are some jobs that have come back. There are some signs that there are a few of these things that are working. But here's the problem. If you have Gary Cohn, as he did for the longest time, as his lead economic advisor, and Mnuchin as his Treasury Secretary. These are two Wall Street guys. I think that he made a calculation that he's going to staff his inner circle with people who are part of the establishment, but keep them on a leash and make the policies himself. And the problem is that might have worked had it not been for Russiagate. But the whole Mueller investigation and the attack on Trump has forced him to spend most of his time looking over his shoulder to make sure he's not going to get knifed in the back. And so he's been hindered in what he wanted to do strategically and economically. But I think he figured that the most important thing was the strategic concerns. And so he moved aggressively to work out the Korean situation, which was a really dangerous immediate problem. And it's moving brilliantly. I mean, this is something Kim Jong-un made the point, I will denuclearize while Trump is still in office. Now, that should have been headline story day after day. It barely got mentioned. The situation in the Middle East, you mentioned that the U.S. is coordinating, the U.S. military is coordinating with Russia on a number of things. We haven't had a war yet, despite what Bolton's trying to do, what Theresa May's trying to do. I think Trump's relationship with Putin has been very important in that. So I think he started out by saying he's got to deal with this strategic mess that was created by Bush and Obama with the wars. Now, it's hard to unravel because there are things that we are doing, the United States is doing under Trump, that are not good. I mean, we did twice bomb Syria, send missiles against Syria, claiming they used chemical weapons, when it was clear they didn't. We did accept the British explanation for the chemical warfare against the Russian defector Skripal, even though it's obvious that that was another fraud. So there's some things there that don't quite make sense, just as supporting a stock market bubble as a recovery doesn't make sense. But I think there's a direction underneath it. And what I would like to see is the president be much more open and aggressive in addressing what he's doing and tell people, here's what I'm doing on Korea. Do you want a nuclear war with Korea or not? Here's what I'm doing on trade. Do you want to have American jobs come back? Do you want to have American industry or not? I think these are things. And finally, do we want to have a Justice Department and an FBI that thinks it has the right to overturn the vote of the American people or not? And I think by making these much more direct and powerful interventions, it will rally the base that elected him 2 years ago and turn back the so-called blue wave that the mass media is trying to promote.
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, this is not a perfect situation where he can stop everything from going on. Remember, the deep state, the cabal, they've been in power for such a long time. They had everything set up. And for him, within, 2 years, to tackle every single thing would be completely impossible to have it all, happen at once. Because first of all, in his administration, there are many deep state operatives still in there. He still has to get rid of them, has to, get them out. And the deep state has been, pushing their agenda in many parts of the world. And it's very difficult to stop everything. But I think the letters that are going back and forth between Kim Jong-un and Putin, where the corporate media can't get a hold of them, they can't really find out what they're talking about. I think this is being done on purpose. I think this is why he's not using email or electronic communications. I think there's an understanding of what is really happening, and they're communicating with each other and just maybe telling Russia, hold off, while we get through all of this. And, yes, the United States backed the Skripal poisoning, but I think you have to pick and choose your battles. I don't think you can do everything at once. It'd be completely impossible because the deep state is so entrenched in everything. It'd be completely impossible.
I agree with you. You can't do everything at once. And you're dealing with, in a sense, on the bigger issues, we're dealing with things that go back to 1963 and the assassination of President Kennedy. And since Kennedy's assassination, we've had the economy taken over completely top down by Wall Street and the City of London, who have a different view of economics. The neoliberal view of economics is that you don't need manufacturing if you can get cheaper wages in other parts of the world. We don't need an American manufacturing base. We don't need infrastructure. It's a different conception. And their idea is that our nuclear might is what gives us the right to tell other nations what to do. That's the whole Project for a New American Century, the Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Cheney crowd that came in with Bush. And Obama was no different. Now, Trump doesn't buy into that. He wants to see America be the strongest country in the world, but not to dictate to other countries what they should do, but to work with them on common interests, and where there are disagreements, to discuss them, not to launch regime change wars. And so I think on the whole, for these 2 years, you have to give him somewhat of an incomplete, because he hasn't been able to do what he wanted to do. Because of why? Because of the coup. And that's not an excuse for Trump. I wish he would be more direct and aggressive in fighting it, and maybe firing someone like Mnuchin or John Bolton and saying, look, these aren't my policies, or Nikki Haley would be my choice for someone to fire. But, I think the important thing is that if he has 2 more years to operate, where he can then follow through the initiatives he's taken with Putin and Xi Jinping, follow through on the restructuring of the financial system so that he can then move against this funny money policy of the Federal Reserve, of the so-called central banks, we'll see dramatic changes. And the most important reason I think that this is what's going on is because of the reaction against him. The absolute hysteria that you see on the pages of the New York Times and on CNN, MSNBC, even Fox, every day, the blowback against Trump it tells a bigger story than virtually anything else. And so people have to take heart in this and realize we're in an ongoing battle. The battle wasn't decided in November 2016. It's still in front of us. And we need the American people on their toes and put their thinking caps on and go out and mobilize the population.
Do you think his ultimate plan is to nationalize maybe the Fed?
I would hope so. I think the Fed is an albatross around our necks. It's unconstitutional. It gives the power of credit to the hands of private interests who often have a very different view of what economic policy should be. Their view is that the first priority is to protect the big banks. And the big banks right now are bloated with trillions of dollars of worthless debt. Now, instead of having that written down in 2008 when we had the first shock, what they did is they gave them 20-something trillion, estimates range from 21 to 28 trillion dollars to mostly banks and shadow banking system, insurance companies, and so on, to allow them to keep trading worthless financial paper at the face value as opposed to the real value. If Trump were to say we're going to end that, and one of the ways to do that would be with Glass-Steagall, to say if you're a commercial bank, fine, get rid of your investment banking side, get rid of your derivative debt, and we'll keep you in business. But if you're going to be an investment bank, you're going to have to price that debt at market value and eat the losses. That would destroy the power of the deep state. So I think that's how I think he should go. I don't know if he will do that, but I know enough about some of the discussions around him to know that he's deeply suspicious of the power that's been put in people like Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan and Timothy Geithner and the people who run the Federal Reserve.
Harley, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
Well, they can get to my blog, and the best way to do that is to send me an email, and I'll send you a link. And the email address is harleysch@gmail.com. It's harleysch@gmail. And just say you heard this on the X22 Report, and I've had ongoing communication with a lot of your listeners and subscribers, and find that you have a very thoughtful and proactive audience. So I encourage people to do that and get involved in the fight.
Fantastic. Harley, once again, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate it.
Okay, see you soon.